Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Thursday, March 24th. And if you would like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can always go to weather.gov/Alaska, and that will zoom in on the state of Alaska. But if you go to the primary page at weather.gov, you'll get a map of the continental U.S. with Hawaii and Alaska in the lower left, and it's a point-and-click map, an interactive map that you can click on, and it'll give you forecast, watches, warnings, advisories, and all sorts of other information for anywhere in the country. You can check up on family and friends. Looking at the map from this Thursday afternoon, the primary weather features in the center of the continental U.S. are a couple of areas of high fire danger. We have red flag warnings for parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, and then down into southern Texas, including the Big Bend area. For us, though, we still have blizzard warnings that will be extended into noon Saturday for the eastern Arctic coast. Breezy conditions there have caused ground blizzard conditions in areas. We have an avalanche warning for the Kenai and western Chugach Mountains there, especially the eastern half of the Kenai Peninsula and surrounding areas there of Prince William Sound now into Friday. North Pacific low pressure systems will track into the Gulf every 2 to 3 days, so it'll keep the weather active down across that part of the state. Overall, though, we're still anticipating to see some above normal temperatures and precipitation to close out this month into early April, especially across about the southern third of the state. I'll highlight that coming up at the end of the show. Here are the current, though, warnings and advisories. We have those blizzard warnings that will remain in effect until noon Saturday for the eastern Arctic coast, including Prudhoe Bay on over to Kaktovik. We could see some stronger wind gusts up over 40 miles an hour, creating ground blizzard conditions, and bitter cold wind chills down to around 50 below, especially at nighttime. We still have a winter weather advisory for windy conditions, some blowing snow and light snow there, the eastern half of the North Slope and Brooks Range until 10 p.m. this Thursday evening. Farther south, though, there are the avalanche warnings that have been issued for the western Chugach and Kenai Mountains. This includes Girdwood, Portage, Moose Pass, Turnagain Pass, Summit Lake, Lost Lake, and Seward. So the mountains in those areas are going to be prone to a high risk of avalanches occurring because of heavy snowfall and rain combined with strong winds. Will create very unstable snow conditions in the mountains there. So be aware of that if you're planning on doing any sort of recreating here Friday into Saturday, because again, I think the bulk of the snow with this latest Gulf flow will be hitting that area come late tonight through the first half of Friday. And looking at a couple of webcams from across the state, way up in the northwest, Wainwright earlier had been under winter weather advisory for some blowing snow and things. That has since been allowed to expire, but kind of haze and some drifting snow there. Temperature mid-afternoon at 7 below 0 Fahrenheit. Whittier, you can see the mountains just being coated there with snow. They're going to see heavy snowfall, 1 to 2 feet of snow total could fall here through Friday in the mountains, the eastern Kenai Peninsula and the areas surrounding Prince William Sound. Temperature there, though, near the coast, overcast there, 37 degrees, but snowing in the mountains. And another thing I want to pass along is that our first outlook for the river breakup season of 2022, the thing to note is statewide, high snowpack across Alaska. In fact, some areas seeing near record snowpack. Also observed normal river ice thickness, and we expect a normal spring warm-up pattern just based on the current couple of month outlook. So this is going to overall increase the chance for snowmelt flooding for most of the state. So stay tuned. We're still a bit a ways yet from all of that snow and ice breaking free, but we will begin in 3 weeks, 3 weeks from today, Thursday, on April 14th, we will begin our special River Watch segments. We bring in a River Forecast Center forecaster who kind of gives a synopsis about what's going on, the current state of the river breakup situation. So we'll begin that in mid-April. Stay tuned. Okay, looking at satellite imagery, we can see the low pressure, the curl in the clouds there, lifting from the North Pacific through the lower and then into the southwest Gulf, just east of Kodiak Island. That feature is what's bringing in the winds, the precipitation there along the Gulf Coast. We've seen wind gusts this afternoon to storm force up near 60 miles an hour at Middleton Island there in the northern part of the Gulf there, just south of Prince William Sound. And there's the low there, 986 low, kind of a double barrel system. Meanwhile, there's high pressure approaching the Canadian Arctic coast, building southeastward into north central Canada. And between these two weather systems, it's creating some pretty good pressure gradient. That's why we have the stronger winds along the Arctic coast, creating ground blizzard conditions in some areas. And then we have storm force winds in portions of the Gulf, particularly at least right now just south of Cordova, but we could see some stronger winds set up there at the entrance to Cook Inlet tomorrow. So tonight we expect that low sitting there just east of Kodiak Island. It's going to retrograde, progress westward toward Kodiak Island by Friday afternoon, and then eventually move further west and weaken toward Bristol Bay and along the southwest, say lower Kuskokwim Delta Saturday afternoon. There will be another low pressure skirting the Aleutians through the North Pacific tomorrow and early Saturday, and that feature will eventually emerge into the Gulf and produce another round of some precipitation and some winds along the Gulf Coast for early next week. Looking at temperatures, we expect low temperatures to stay above freezing across the Panhandle, near freezing Anchorage south to along south central coast areas, teens, Copper River Basin, other side of the Alaska Range. Highs will get up into the low 40s, Anchorage on up toward Talkeetna, as well as Kenai and Homer, even there down toward King Salmon, and certainly highs low mid 40s across the Panhandle. Temperatures Saturday morning generally 20s and teens there across the south central interior, near freezing along the coast, low mid 30s there in the Panhandle, and maybe a couple degrees cooler, but still near 40 or so there up to Talkeetna and over toward Cordova, and 41 at Homer. As we go farther north, temperatures will be sub-zero along the spine of the Brooks Range and the North Slope and Arctic coast. Single digits there through the Yukon River Valley. Daytime highs near or just above zero there along the North Slope and Arctic coast. But look at Fairbanks, could get up above freezing into the mid-30s. And for Saturday morning, lows still below zero there across the North Slope, Arctic coast in, say, the Yukon Flats. Other areas there, single digits, lower teens, but still looking for temperatures on Saturday, perhaps getting up into the 30s there across the south side of the Yukon River. And as we go back further south and west, the interior, we'll see lows generally in the teens, above 10 above there for Friday morning. Afternoon highs on the west side of the Alaska Range could breach the freezing mark, even 40 degrees there or so around King Salmon, and generally above freezing out across the Aleutians. For Saturday morning, lows generally back down the 10 to 15 degree range across the southwest interior, 20s across the Alaska Peninsula, and near or so freezing there across the eastern central Aleutians, with afternoon highs going up the Kuskokwim River Basin, getting at least into the mid, maybe upper 30s in a few spots, and generally mid and upper 30s down the length of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. A check at the extended temperature forecast. This is the Climate Prediction Center of the National Weather Service. 6 to 10 day temperature outlook March 30th through April 3rd indicates a pretty good chance of above normal temperatures for the south central and southwest part of the state, including Anchorage, Kodiak, Dillingham, and areas further north could end up being a little below normal there across the north slope centered on the Arctic coast around Utqiagvik. And precipitation, as well, first we'll check out temperatures going into early April. The 8 to 14 day outlook is the 1st through the 7th. Again, that continuation of above normal temperatures across the southern third of the state is anticipated. Precipitation-wise here to close out this month and start April, we are looking for precipitation to average a bit above normal across the southern third of the state, especially along and south of the Alaska Range. and that trend continuing across the southeast half of the mainland into the panhandle for that first week or so of April. So again, we'll be keeping a close eye on things as to how temperatures and precipitation unfold here as we begin to enter the river breakup season, as we get a little deeper into the month of April. So stay tuned for further forecasts and outlooks.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's take a look now at your flight weather, and if you do have a flight planned Friday into Saturday, the main weather player will be low pressure located in the Gulf. It's going to retrograde westward back toward Kodiak Island as we head into Friday night, Saturday. Off to the north, stronger winds continue along the Arctic coast, creating blizzard conditions, blowing and drifting snow at times, thanks to big high pressure. It's sliding in off the Arctic Ocean to along the Canadian Arctic coast, and it's between these two weather systems. We have some tighter pressure gradients, not just along the Gulf, but also across northern parts of the state. And then later in the weekend, low pressure will be passing south of the Aleutian chain up through the North Pacific, and then that energy and moisture will emerge into the Gulf and spread more precipitation and inclement weather across areas of the Gulf Coast early next week. For Friday afternoon, we do expect IFR conditions there along Kodiak Island, the western end of the Gulf, up toward Prince William Sound, also in through areas of the southwest and Bristol Bay, and again along the Arctic coast. Saturday morning, still IFR conditions persisting there up along the Arctic coast from Utqiagvik to Katovik. And then further south, we still see IFR conditions around Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait. Also portions of the southwest interior going up the Kuskokwim River Basin, particularly maybe around Bethel on over toward Aniak, and then also out in the central Aleutians. And for Saturday afternoon, still IFR conditions are expected along the Arctic coast. Kodiak Island, kind of in the Bristol Bay southeast quadrant there of the Bering Sea and south of the Alaska Peninsula. Pass conditions for Friday, Anaktuvik Pass as well as Adigan Pass should hold on to VFR conditions. As we go further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will remain MVFR. In fact, the further east you fly, the east entrance there of Lake Clark could be IFR, and especially as you go out over, say, Cook Inlet. And then as we round the Alaska Range, Rainy Pass should see MVFR conditions becoming VFR. And then Windy Pass, generally MVFR conditions should hold through the day. Friday, further east, look for VFR conditions early at Isabel, giving way to MVFR. And then Mentasta should start out MVFR, becoming VFR. Further south and west, Tanita will hold on to MVFR conditions. And once we get around Portage Pass, I expect IFR conditions to hold there across the eastern third of the pass out into Prince William Sound. Further west, we'll see MVFR conditions become VFR, especially along the west entrance. And finally, in the northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White, we'll see VFR conditions Friday morning give way to MVFR conditions. And looking at freezing levels, the surface freezing line extends along, the panhandle, inner channels to along the northern portion of the Gulf Coast to across Kodiak Island, then dip well south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then come back up across the eastern Aleutians into the lower Bering Sea. The greatest threat for icing, considerable moderate icing, will be along the Gulf Coast, especially out the open waters there along the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, the entrance to Cook Inlet between 6,000 and 14,000 feet. Freezing levels and icing come down a bit between 3,000 and 12,000 feet there as you get up further up Cook Inlet and a little more inland. And looking at what we have in the way of the upper level wind circulation, 30,000 feet jet stream level. Most impressive feature there is the lower left of your screen. Anticyclonically curved, 150 to 155 knot westerly jet core. And as far as bringing it down to 9,000 feet mid-levels, we see the circulation, low-pressure circulation over Kodiak Island, onshore, southeasterly flow there, especially the Kenai Peninsula, 45 knots up through Turnagain Arm. And then also 40 knot southeasterly winds out over the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea, north of Bering Strait, and bringing it down to 3,000 feet. Still, that low-pressure circulation, counterclockwise, 40, 50 knots winds around that, with 50-knot winds coming across the central part of the Alaska Peninsula and that other low just southwest of the central Aleutians. This will translate to the likelihood of isolated severe turbulence along portions of the Northwest Gulf along the Kenai coastline, as well as toward Shelikof Strait and the entrance of Cook Inlet. We'll also have another area of surface to 4,000-foot turbulence there just south side of the Brooks Range to the Yukon River in the west and central interior, and then also extending out along the Alaska Peninsula to the tip there of the eastern Aleutians between the surface and 4,000 feet. So there you have it. There's a look at your aviation weather, and if you do have a flight planned, check the latest conditions and forecast and have a safe one.
Hey there, Starshines. Trace here. Remember when I mentioned more conjunctions were coming? They're upon us! Hit the skies any morning this week just before sunrise, and you can watch Venus, Mars, and Saturn cluster together in the southeast. Venus is the bright dot, Mars is a bit dimmer, and Saturn is quite dim. On the 28th, Venus, Saturn, Mars, and the Moon will be clumped up in conjunction. Saturn will be sandwiched between Venus and the Moon, making it easier to spot, while Mars will be off to the right, forming a triangle with Venus and Saturn. Amazing! But we're not done. Keep watching the trigonometry, because Mars and Saturn will be super close on April 4th. And then Jupiter will appear in the morning skies, rising before the sun a little earlier each day. By late April, it'll be a planet party, so check back for details. It'll get bonkers. Get out there and keep looking up.
The Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge is a refuge in Alaska. It's the third largest refuge in the National Wildlife Refuge System. North of Fairbanks, it's a vast ecosystem of wetlands. What drives this refuge are natural forces of fire, ice, and water.
The Yukon Flats has got a really interesting history. Back in the late 50s, early 1960s, there was a proposal to dam the Yukon River down by Rampart, which is downstream of the Yukon Flats. And it was a hydroelectric proposal. And so in order to assess the merits of that proposal, people got together because they were a little bit concerned about what the impacts might be on the Yukon Flats, the habitat, and all the people living within the Yukon Flats Refuge. There's quite a few people living within the refuge. We have 7 villages. So in order to figure out how special the Yukon Flats was, the Fish and Wildlife Service banded over 40,000 ducks within the Yukon Flats. And using the band return information, they found out that those ducks were using 45 of the 50 lower 48 states. They were using 7 foreign countries, and they were using most of the provinces over in Canada, as well as all the major flyways down in the lower 48. And so that identified that the Yukon Flats was a special breeding area, and that information, along with a lot of other public information that was gathered during that whole process, really ensured that the dam never did go in, and thus the habitat was preserved.
So what that did is it really highlighted the national importance of this area and how important conserving this particular area is for conserving many other natural areas in the lower 48 and even across the continent.
To protect the Yukon Flats Refuge because we have responsibility towards our future generations to leave land protected in the state that it is now. The Yukon Flats is a wild place. The ecosystem is intact and functioning, and you can't find that very many places in the rest of the U.S.
The Yukon Flats Refuge is among the most important places for ducks. So each spring, millions of ducks, and in addition to shorebirds and geese, raptors and loons, they all fly to the refuge to nest and rear their young, and the reason they are attracted to this area is because it has really enriched wetlands. There are lots of nutrients in the wetlands that provide a lot of food for the growing young.
We also have a lot of predator, prey species like bears and black bears, grizzly bears, wolves. We also have a lot of moose and fur bearers that use the refuge. So overall, there's just a great diversity of both upland, lowland, and migratory bird species that use the refuge.
Most people know the flats as a duck nursery, and that was one of the main purposes that was designed for, but a lot of recent research over the last decade has really illustrated how important it is to a variety of native endemic fish species for subsistence and recreational and commercial fisheries throughout the entire Yukon River Basin and out to supporting commercial fisheries out to the Bering Sea as well. So it supports a variety of different whitefish and salmon species, the northern pike, a little bit of everything that people rely on as cultural identities, but also for subsistence resources and where people go to recreate and enjoy being outside.
The type of recreation that you're going to find on Yukon Flats Refuge is very primitive. And what that often does is it gives people a complete break from some of the stresses of today's world. There are no cell phone towers out there. There are no roads. There are no trails. So any type of recreation that people have is entirely natural. The lands and waters within the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge are open to the public to enjoy. And that's a really important tenet upon which the United States is built.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, looking at today's sea ice edge, we continue to see that there has been a southward expansion of the ice that has occurred for some time now, and it's generally filled that area east of St. Paul and St. George, though the leading edge of that ice is going to have a tendency here as we move ahead over the next couple of weeks for further melting to occur, and as we start to see maybe a little milder pattern develop across the far southwest and south central areas of the state, that should at least prevent any further maintenance or growth of ice. It'll just be a matter of shifting around by the wind as well as due to the seasonal melt we would expect as we enter spring. So looking at the panhandle as far as our marine weather interests are concerned, the inner channels will see winds out of the southeast 20 to 25 knots, especially Petersburg down through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. To the north, winds will be out of the north 15 knots there through Lynn Canal, north of Juneau. And then the areas along the outer Gulf course, you'll see gale force winds, especially west of Sitka, Gustavus, and increasing as you get further west on over toward just along the Kenai Peninsula shoreline. And during the day on Saturday, winds will come down across the whole northeastern portion of the Gulf. We're looking for winds generally around 10 knots for the outer coast, with waves maybe right around 6-7 feet. Inner channels will see winds become northerly 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet. Now, across the northwestern Gulf here for Friday, we anticipate gale force winds up as high as 45 knots there south of Cordova. And offshore of the Kenai, 40-knot easterly winds. Winds will be northeasterly to 35 knots through the lower portions of Cook Inlet. Waves there up to 13 feet. And then by Saturday, look for winds to come down. Northeasterly 15 knots through Prince William Sound, waves a few feet. Generally east winds around 20 knots off the Kenai with 9-foot waves. And then easterly winds from just north there of Kodiak to the entrance of Cook Inlet at 30 knots with waves 8 to 10 feet. On Friday for Kodiak Island, you'll see the low pressure circulation that's right on the east side of the island, centered near Kodiak. counterclockwise circulation, and northwesterly winds 30 to 35 knots on the North Pacific side with waves of 12 to 14 feet. And northwesterly winds to 30 knots on the Bering side, waves 5 to 8 feet. For Saturday, we'll see winds generally out of the east-southeast around 20-25 knots on the North Pacific and Western Gulf side, with waves on the order of 8 to 10 feet. And then on the Bering side, look for east to northeast winds around 15 knots and waves 3 to maybe as high as 6 feet there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutians, if you look to the southwest of the central Aleutians, there will be a compact area of low pressure bypassing the Aleutian chain Friday and Saturday, bypassing them from the south. And we'll see winds ahead of that from the southeast, from Nikolsky westward through Atka and Adak, at around 15 to 20 knots, but a little stronger there just south of Adak, 30-knot winds, waves on the North Pacific side, anywhere from around 7 to 10 feet, and on the North Pacific side, 5 to 8 feet, on the Bering side, 5 to 8 feet. And then for Saturday, you can see that compact low passing south of the eastern Aleutians, so winds are going to turn northeast to north on the order of 30 to as high as 35 and 40 knot gale force winds. Waves 10 to 13 feet on the Bering side and 12 to 16 feet on the North Pacific side. The west coast and southwest winds will be out of the mainly west-northwest component, 10 to 15 knots, though you still could see some winds to 30 knots there over the ice just west-southwest there of the lower Kuskokwim Delta. And then on Saturday, winds will try to develop a little more of a northerly component, north to northeast winds, the lower half there of the southeast bearing off the southwest coast, and then around 10 knots from the northwest, including Norton Sound. Along the Arctic coast, winds will remain strongest there, 35 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Katovik. On the further west there, the lower Chukchi Sea, look for winds 15 to 25 knots. And for Saturday, winds will come down a little bit there along the Arctic coast to around 30 knots out of the east. And then look for east winds along the northwest coast there off of Wainwright, 20 knots, but then more variable coming through the Bering Strait at around 5 to 10 knots. And by late tonight, low pressure will be just east of Kodiak Island and situated backing up to right along the east side of Kodiak Island on Friday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.